Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Humans of Tech. Today I'll be speaking with Dr. Bruno Zamborlin, founder of HyperSurfaces and Emojis, about his thoughts on smart cities, music, and the Internet of Things. Enjoy. I think the first thing is some quick background on your journey. How did you become interested in computer science, entrepreneurship, and also music?
Yes, absolutely. So thanks for having me here. Um, my story is related to the fact that I always been passionate about maths, mathematics, and um, my day job has always been to work with technology, and I did also a PhD in artificial intelligence between London and Paris. And in both these centers, it was pretty much a computer science department within an art context. So here come Pompidou Center. It's basically the biggest music tech center that we have here in Europe. About 200 people only doing technology for music and working really side by side between researchers and technologists and composers. And then the other institute I did a PhD is Goldsmiths, which is an art school, the one that where Coldplay and Blur and Damien Hirst came from. So they also have an amazing computing department. So really like this environment really helped for me seeing basically this connection between AI, computer science, and arts in general. I've always been a musician myself and passionate about, music, but also adding this third dimension to music, which is interactivity. So you have time and you have amplitude in a sound waveform, and I tried to add interactivity. So what a user does when he listens to music, like active listening to music. So all this background, all this information kind of came together really to shape my education, I guess.
For sure. It's so cool that you said you started off with like an interest in math, because I can relate to that, and also the connection you're talking about between like your school was a place where computer science and artists work together. I think all these three fields, like computer science, art, or computer science and math, like math is like a discipline of art, like some like the proofs are rather elegant and stuff like that. So what like relationships do you see yourself between like computer science or maybe even just coding and art?
Oh, it's a huge one, I think every contemporary artist is always hugely influenced by the context. It can be the social context, the cultural context, but also the technological context. And if you think about Chopin, he had to, you know to uh, uh, to play pianos like as pianos were about, just being invented, really. Like he played with probably some very out of tune piano that would be kind of hard to listen today, really. And I think artists always have like to to be they're always driven basically by the technological limitations and potentials that the tools around us give us in a way. um, and yeah, and I think um, you can see creative computing classes being spread across many universities now, like trying to make artists think multilaterally, and also trying to perceive technology in a way that is a little bit different than a classic approach of like black box, where you buy a computer and this computer has a bunch of softwares that you can use, and kind of follow the rules that are being pre-coded for you by the designers of that software. Like I think like all this wave of creative coding really goes towards the direction of actually opening this black box and actually creating your own tools that then you use and that affect your art so much. So it's a tool, and in the same way that a canvas, you know, is a tool. With this little difference that it changes every day, and every day there's a new technological tool, right, that you can use and that can motivate you or set a new boundary, a new limitation, a new objective. So yeah, I think like I read somewhere that the definition of a contemporary artist is not that he lives today, and that is not that basically, but is someone that actually is deeply affected from the contemporary surrounding, either in a cultural, in a social, or in a technological way.
It's a very interesting point, because I was just thinking about like how like a lot of modern artists today, like I listen to a lot of EDM, a lot of the stuff they do today might not have been possible maybe like 50 years ago, and kind of going into what you're doing with Emojis. I was just wondering, like, because I saw some of the video demos, is it so when someone is learning how to use it, is it kind of a trial and error process to like figure out the notes and like the sounds, or is there like a formal learning process they can go through?
So it's a little bit of both. So the idea of Emojis, just for people that are listening, that I don't know if they know what it is this sensor that you can basically attach to any physical surface made of any rigid material. So think about glass or wood or metal or plastic. And then you literally use AI to basically program in a way this physical object so as to react to your movement and gestures. And so you can program it to play the musical sounds you want based on your own gestures. So it's a way, if you wanted to play the world and to program objects around you as you want. And in a way is a meta instrument, because it's an instrument to create your own instrument without coding, in a very physical way, in a very creative way. And the way it works is that is a little piezo transducer, so it's a little vibration sensor basically that senses all the vibrations that you make when you touch an object. So, you know, think about a tree or a kitchen table or a floor, or, you know, whatever you want. And then you can say, okay, so this movement here is this sound, and that movement is that sound. And to answer to your question, the way people approach this is very different, and it's really interesting to me to look at how they approach a tool that is so open and limitless in a way, because you know, it's not an instrument per se. It's a meta instrument, is a tool. And how much people are actually like, they approach it in a different way based on their background. So a dancer could you know, dance on a table to play the instrument, but a percussionist is gonna play it like a percussion, and a kid is gonna find out, like, you go on YouTube, you see people playing basketball to make music. You know, there's like, you literally can invent your own way to make music that is completely outside of any preconception we know about music. And I really like that idea. So yeah, it depends a lot on who's playing it, I think.
For sure. What's the favorite a favorite song you have that someone has made with Emojis?
There's a lot of installations and things. Like, I think one amazing show I saw was in Japan. There was like these two artists. They make this kind of ambient psychedelic electronic kind of music, and there was they were doing this performance behind a desk, and then but then in the middle of the audience there was this tree. It was outdoor, and they put like three sensors, three emojis on the tree, and people could interact with the sounds they were listening to just by touching the tree itself, and very naturally, like all the audience was actually spread like around this tree. And I really liked that simple idea of like making music that is kind of that suggests this active listening experience. So I really liked that one.
For sure. What's the origin behind the name Emojis?
It's just a paper. It was an academic paper. It's like mosaic. No, it was like model gestural surface, because like the sound technique that I use. So that the sound that you hear is actually this thing called model synthesis, which basically is this idea that the sound that you hear is not digital and is not acoustic, is a true hybrid. So when you play a guitar, for example, just to explain this briefly, like when you play a guitar, you hear the impact between two bodies, an exciter, that is the plectrum or your hand, and then you have a resonator, which is the string of the guitar, and that's true for any sound you hear. And with Emojis, basically the exciter is the real acoustic vibrations that is generated in the object you play, and then it goes to excite a digital model that is emulated on your phone. So you can choose like the model of a string, the model of a skin, of a membrane, you know, and you're exciting this model by touching the object. So it's a truly, you know, hybrid acoustic digital techniques, and I wrote that paper, and basically that became like the name of the instrument.
Nice. So is the way that it works is it kind of takes the normal vibration that the medium, like if you're tapping on a table, takes like the wood vibration and it kind of simulates how that vibration would sound on maybe like a string?
Exactly, that is exactly as you describe it. And on top of that, you can also control the pitch, so the note that you make with AI. So on top of that, so the sound is made exactly as you describe it, but then the note, you can program like which note you want to play based on just recognition. So you can say that your thumb is a C, and maybe your you know, the palm of your hand is a D, etc., etc.
Nice. There's a lot of things to get into there, but I think the first thing I wanted to talk about is it's kind of like a style transfer in some sorts of like you could have like maybe like between instruments too, not just mediums. Like you could take piano notes and convert it to how it would sound on like a flute maybe. Is that possible with this?
Yeah, I can do all sort of things. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. So what about like making the algorithm behind emojis into kind of a like plugin for a DAW, or like if someone has a soundtrack with vibrations already, you could kind of use this to make a kind of soundtrack for that.
Sorry, I didn't get it. Sorry.
Yeah, so if you have like a video already with like people making different sounds, this could be like a plugin for like a digital workstation like Ableton or Logic or something, where you could just take a normal soundtrack and then your plugin could kind of make music out of it.
Yeah, yeah. You can already do that. So there's already the plugin,
Okay.
DST or audio unit plugin. So you can also do this kind of things. So if instead of the audio coming from the sensor live as it's supposed to be used, you you know, you use another soundtrack. Basically, you can kind of hack it and use it as an effect if you want.
For sure. So going into the like vibration stuff, so you're also using the same technology with HyperSurfaces. And one thing I wanted to ask about there is, so if you have like a HyperSurfaces enabled on like, let's say your table, how do you avoid detecting like accidental gestures as commands?
You don't really. Every time there is a vibration that's translated into sound, then I have another company called HyperSurfaces that uses like a similar idea of turning objects into devices. That's more like for creators and designers and businesses, and that one takes this this into account. But for Emojis, really, is because is a musical, is a meta instrument. There's no boundaries. You like everything that happens, any mistake is actually translated into sound exactly as it happens with a guitar or a piano.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool that you're working on HyperSurfaces because like as we go into like the Internet of Things, like instead of having like one smart device for everything, like HyperSurfaces is kind of like a universal object that can make any or a universal device that can make any object smart in a way. It's pretty interesting. Did you were you thinking about that when you came up with it, or was it kind of, or like what's the story behind like how you came up with HyperSurfaces?
Yeah, the story was that after like 3 years of working on Emojis as a musical instrument, like we felt that there was something very, very powerful about this idea of transforming or using really physical objects around us to make them smart, to make them interactive, and also to empower people that are not AI scientists to actually have a role and like kind of open this AI black box, about like empower them like to come up with their own interaction paradigm and make like making them able to use this technology. And that's what we wanted to do. So we wanted to go beyond music, and we wanted to make this the core concept of transforming physical objects into smart data enabled surfaces available to anyone. And that's why we came up with HyperSurfaces, which is basically this little chip that has a vibration sensor embedded in it, that works without a smartphone, without a computer, even without an internet connection. It's a tiny chip that listens to the vibration, and every time an event that has been predefined by the user is spotted, then a notification is sent in real time, instantaneously with super low latency, which means that you design car interiors or security systems or the cities of the future, or houses or whatever it is. You can think about all the objects that you design or the spaces that you design in a completely different way. You can make them interacting based on your active actions and interactions, or based on your passive movements, as you want. So there are projects where you say, okay, I am driving and I'm touching this air vent, and I want to control the temperature without looking at the screen. Okay, you can do that. At the same time, you can also track like passive events that create any vibration. So we created this smart hub. In the US, it's called a stove. Sorry, a stove that basically is able to notify you if the water is simmering or is boiling, or if someone is frying or mixing, like a lot of different movements and interactions. And you as a designer can interact with all this information accordingly in very creative ways. So that's the story behind HyperSurfaces. Is basically empowering any creator to leverage this technology beyond music.
Sure. So how easy is it for like a new user to train it in a new pattern? Like, does it take, like I know like with some machine learning algorithms, you need a lot of training data, but here is it more like one-shot learning, or how does it work?
Absolutely, yeah. So we wanted, people that are not experts in AI to be able to use this technology. So we created a general model of the vibrations, of the interactions between people and objects through vibrations, and that becomes our general model. And then very easily we made this web-based graphical platform that anyone can use, really, where you simply like stick the sensor to the object you want to use, and then you connect it via USB to your laptop, for example. You go on our platform, and then you record just a few examples of the events that you want to learn effectively. And of course, you have to record all the variations of these events. But that can be done incredibly quickly. And then because we have this general model of the vibrations that with just very few data points, ranging from 20 to, I don't know, 200 maybe data points per class that you want to define, then this platform automatically generates an AI model on the edge that is automatically flashed on the chipset. You don't even have to leave the web browser. It's all automated. So it really becomes a tool for expression, you know, not an AI library.
Yeah, that's super cool. One thing though is like, sounds like they sound different, like depending on where you are. So if you change the placement of the sensor, like how much do you have to retrain it, or does it like retain? Is it still able to recognize everything?
So it depends a little bit on the sounds or the events that you train. You know, if these events are different enough, changing the position of the sensor might not have a great impact. Of course, it's safer to retrain because you might be just better off retraining because it doesn't take long anyway. But it really depends on the use case. If it's just for you, or if it's a commercial product, then obviously you're gonna glue the sensor. You're not gonna touch it again, right? So it really depends on the use case. Really, you're free to experiment with it.
For sure. I think one thing I heard you mention before was like an interview was like HyperForce. So could you elaborate a bit more on that idea, like HyperForce, or like how do you see the integration of technology and nature? I think for HyperForce, what you were saying was integrating the HyperSurfaces technology with like forests for some use case. But yeah.
I can't recall exactly this example about force. I don't recall it. If it was on the TED talk, I think that the argument was that basically we are, you know, we basically coded interactions between people and objects, and today we are using the vibrations, but tomorrow we could use another type of sensor. So it could be a force sensor, it could be an accelerometer, it could be a gyroscope. Our intention, our vision is to expand this platform so as to incorporate also other sensors, because at the end of the day, what we do is recognizing time series data. And so we want to expand to different sensors and different phenomena, basically. So maybe it was related to this argument.
Could you go into your vision a bit more, like talking about the other sensors you had in mind, and maybe in like 10 years what you guys might be doing? If you, yeah.
Yeah, maybe not 10 years, maybe 2 years, you know, we're pretty fast. What we want to do is to become this ubiquitous AI overlay of sensor intelligence that transforms passive sensors into AI agents, and moving basically from sensing to feeling, from sensing to become sentient. You know, is this idea that empowering creators and designers to design the applications of the future, where our devices and even daily objects become aware of the context, become aware of what's going on without violating our privacy, because we're not watching people, we're not listening to them talking. All we do is listen to the sensor data, the vibrations. So we don't know who you are, we don't know, but we know exactly what happens, and we enable designers to react accordingly. This is really our vision, is the vision of a world where of sentient connected objects and devices.
For sure, it's a great vision. So going back into the privacy thing, since it is so one advantage you guys have is that it is on the edge, so nothing is going to the cloud. But I was also wondering, does like the edge device, does it store any data? Like, does it learn and get better over time, and how does that work, if so?
Right. Yeah. So the core technology doesn't know. Like what is on the edge is just to process the sensor data. So no sensor data leave the chipset. They don't go to the cloud. They're processed locally, and then the output is just the notification basically of the event that has been detected.
Yeah.
And this can be used locally or not. So what we provide is the chipset that sends up pin level notification, and that is is the designer of the product that decides whether he wants to stream that information or keep it locally, for example, to control a light or or something. So yeah, it's definitely AI on the edge, and then is we enable applications where literally could be in the middle of the desert, and the technology just never leaves the data never leaves the chipset if the designer wants to.
That's great. So if the user wants to get a better model or algorithm, they would have to like re-download it from the internet or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you can release a product today. Say, I don't know. Say you release like a car, say a Tesla car with a hyper steering wheel, let's say, and like the model that you launched today is able to detect I don't know, 2 events, for example. But then maybe in 6 months' time, you want to give like an update where it detects maybe 5 events. I don't know. Then all you do is just a firmware update, and this idea that physical products become like a software basically, where you update their firmware, and they are empowered with new functionalities basically, but the hardware doesn't change. So the sensor and the physical product don't change. It's just a firmware update.
For sure. You mentioned Tesla earlier. Are there any upcoming collaborations or anything with companies like that, or any companies that you can talk about?
Yeah, we're working with automotive companies. We're working with white goods companies, smart home companies, and now we're also starting conversation about the idea of smart cities as well.
That's
and yeah, there's a lot going on. And actually, what we did last year, we worked on prototypes for a few companies. But then we literally stopped doing that. And for the past 6 months, all we've been doing was working on this platform that can enable all these clients and beyond to literally integrate our technology, experiment with our technology with minimum to no support required from us. So you literally have this interface on the web browser. You receive the dev kit from us, and you do the training on your own without having to write one single line of code. So we really worked on this idea of the platform so as to be able to give this technology in the hands of as many people as possible.
Yeah, the interface idea is pretty smart, because I feel like with like Apple, for example, right, when they released the App Store, like they can't come up with all these apps, but people are very creative and they could come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. And like I think you were doing something similar with like the HyperSurfaces API. So
Exactly that. Yeah, you're spot on. It's exactly that. It's like when people ask me, what can you do with this technology? And of course I have ideas, and I work with designers myself, but the real answer is I don't know. I don't think anyone before the invention of the App Store, but even before the invention of the smartphone, I think no one needed a smartphone,
Yeah.
And yet when it came out, it changed everyone's lives, and everyone started like making and using new apps and using this new tool in new ways that I'm sure Apple was not aware of before.
Yeah.
When they were creating the tool itself. And I feel exactly in the same way. Like I don't really know what designers and creators are going to come up with. You know, when you speak to someone that spent his life thinking about the cities of the future, they tell you ideas and situations and needs that I don't know about you, I never heard of. I'm not expert, and they have so many ideas, and I'm really excited about empowering them with this platform.
Sure. It's definitely very hard for one person to be as creative as a large group of people. So it's good to have APIs for services like this. One thing I was wondering though was, so vibrational data, like how, um, like it's kind of crazy, like the stuff you can learn from it. Like you could tell if you're tapping like your finger or your palm, but is there a limit to, is there like a limit to it that kind of affects like useful applications? Like, can you tell the difference between a certain finger and the other, or is it really like how good is it basically?
Right, yeah. There are limitations, and it's hard to foresee them without trying. I think the like as a general rule of thumb, really, but I think is in general with AI, the rule is that you always want, if the event you want to recognize has not many variations, so it's performed always in the same way by all the people, then uh, as long as it's different from another event, then the AI will always work. The problem is when each event can have variations and you still expect it to work. So you say, okay, I want to know when I touch with my thumb or another finger. But the problem is that the training you're gonna do will only teach like some of the variations that you can do with that touch. And if then when you use that product, you perform that action in the same way, of course it's gonna work. But the reality is more complex. So you know it's possible to do incredible things, but you always depend on how many variations you expect basically the AI to be able to model, and then how many data you're willing to provide, basically.
For sure. And since you mentioned that you guys had a underlying model of like the environment and vibrations, um, so you don't, so like how, so when do you guys also like kind of do some training with a particular kinds of objects? Or I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like what if you're training it, so how well does it generalize to like novel environments? Like, I'm not saying that you did this, but if someone was just optimizing for like a house and then someone wanted to use this in like a barn or something, it might not generalize that well. But does yours generalize across many different kinds of environments?
Yes, exactly. So there are two levels for this question. The first one is the vibration. So talking about vibrations, what we did is that first of all we collected a data set of like more than 5 million data points of hundreds of people interacting in many different ways with hundreds of objects of many materials and thickness and sizes. And then really from this data, what we did is that we figured out a way, a taxonomy basically of events, and a taxonomy that can describe any possible interaction between people and objects, or objects and objects. And that makes this general model very versatile, so that what you do when you collect, when you use our platform, is that you fine tune basically this general model for your own object. And of course, like every object is different. So unless you're talking about a mass production of exactly the same object a million times, but like every different object has a different sound. So you want to fine tune it, but the amount of data that you need for that fine tune is incredibly low because of this general model and this taxonomy that we developed beforehand.
Sure. How do you know the taxonomy is representative of maybe it's not like of every possible environment, but how do you know it's representative of a very large proportion of them?
It's a numbers game. So because we have thousands of different use cases in terms of combinations of people, events, and objects. And every time we try a new model, we test it with thousands of different use cases.
Yeah,
So we know what the performances are.
for sure.
It's a numbers game. And then I guess to complete the questions, like this is about the vibrations, but also what we did is that we figured out a way to cope with incredibly noisy signals from sensors data. And what we are able to do now, also because of this taxonomy, is that we are able now to work with different types of sensors like accelerometers and gyroscopes and compass in a very similar way. So we are starting now to move towards that direction as well. And it's very exciting. So we want to extend the platform also to motion sensors. And it's incredible how much can be transferred in terms of learning from one domain to another.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I guess so, like going back to what you said earlier about the very large data set, is it that since you have so many different, it's able to recognize things across so many different environments, to be able to do that, it has to kind of make a universal model rather than like an overfitted one?
Yeah, it's a little bit more fine grained. So what the platform really does is that it asks you a bunch of questions when you start um, calibrating your object.
Yeah.
Um, and based on your answers, it selects some of the templates. You don't really see that as a user, but under the hood, what it does is that it selects the right template for you, so that to become as close as possible to you, so that you're gonna require less data,
Hmm.
in order to generalize. So there's a lot of complexity, but you don't really see that as a user. You just answer to a bunch of questions and you collect your data, and then you're ready to go.
Sure, that's good. The user doesn't want to know, or maybe they
No.
do, but like most of them don't want to know about all the what's going on in the back end. So yeah. One cool thing I saw on one of the video demos you did was you had, I think you had a hypersurface object that was in just like one part of the room, but was able to detect like you placing things on the coat hanger, you touching a plant, but it was just like one, like not one for every object. It was just one in the room. That was pretty cool. Like, how did you like? So were people able to do that now? Like, just have one per room, or do you recommend still going with one per object?
Oh, that one was the coat hanger was, so the piezo was glued on the, how do you call it, on the structure
Hmm.
where the hanger was attached onto.
Oh,
So that the piezo was attached to the structure, and then the event that it was trained to recognize was the act of hanging
yeah,
a coat, basically. And because that video shows, I think, two or three different hangers that are made of different materials. So one was on plastic, one on wood, maybe, and one on metal. And so they make a very different sound. So we were able to recognize them, and even recognized whether it was empty or it was loaded with some cloth.
yeah. So earlier you mentioned smart cities, which I think is super cool. What other like applications are you like pretty excited about? And also like, when do you think this might become like a mass market device, and what are the steps to getting there?
Well, the steps to get there is working with the big players that have the potential to reach millions of customers. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're doing several projects of advanced prototypes for big OEMs, basically in different markets, and it's quite cool to see how much with this platform. They're able like to do the experiments on their own, really. Um, and then because we are a software company, like we work only with such simple hardware. It's just a piezo connected to a chipset, So it's very cool that they can then design their own chipset if they want to, and we simply provide the firmware at the end of the day. So that's very cool. And in terms of what I'm excited about, I think smart cities and a smart home are have incredible potentials. And really, the idea that we're moving towards a new paradigm where instead of you having to modify your behavior because of technology, technology follows you and is there for you when you need it. So you're cooking and they understand that you're cooking, and then this little thing like turns on its own, or there's that little help and that little communication between smart devices that make life easier. And the same when you drive, and the same now very soon when you walk in a city. There are so many things that we can do. Um, I can't disclose like specific
Sure.
applications really, but there are many possible.
That's great. So it's cool that you mentioned that technology will adapt to follow our behavior. Do you think that's because of the AI or like the kind of the design that it's detecting these vibrations?
Is this idea that exactly is this idea that basically the technology becomes sentient. It becomes able basically to listen to what's going on, then react accordingly when it's needed. So instead of you having to say something or having to do a particular touch or particular movement, actually, the technology is already there for you. Is already aware of what you want to do and wants to help you with that. So it's this idea of basically, yeah, uh, injecting awareness on everyday objects, if you want.
Sure. The cool thing about this is it gives people a lot more customizability in terms of their UI, because I think you mentioned that people are able to specify what gestures or like movement patterns correspond to what actions. There's not really that much creativity or customizability with the current like iOS. You can't really change the design that much. But I was wondering, like, what are the like? Do you think there are going to be things that people that'll be like still easier to do on like iOS or a computer versus HyperSurfaces, or do you foresee that HyperSurfaces will be like the main method of interaction with computing in the future?
Oh, I think they're completely different levels. I think, yeah, you will always need. I think it's not about competing or replacing computers or phones. It's really about enabling novel forms of interaction that simply don't exist, and novel form of um, assisted um, guidance, that simply doesn't exist today. So we're not trying to replace your ability to chat on WhatsApp with someone. I think like there are things where a phone is incredibly good. There are other things where a computer is incredibly good, but simply they have nothing to say in most of the applications that we are working on. That make your environment smart. So you don't need your phone at all in that moment. It's a new discipline, if you want. This
Yeah,
ubiquitous intelligence.
for sure. Ubiquitous intelligence, and also like more human interfaces, I guess, like kind of what I think to a certain extent computers are designed to be usable by people, but I think yours will be even more, could be even more like easy to use. Kind of like this reminds me a bit of like Neuralink and other BCI companies. Like they're making like, so instead of interacting with your hands, you interact by thinking, which is a way like easier well, easier for a lot of people to use. Do you see any kind of relationship between the work you're doing and companies like those are doing?
Right, it's a good question. There are different dimensions, isn't it? I think they both have potential, for example, to help impaired people, and also they have a lot of potential to diagnose, because you might want to be aware and of sensor data to spot something that you should know about. Same as brain-computer interface. Yeah. So there might be synergies, but one is really about it's kind of completely concentrated, I suppose, on bypassing interfaces and make our brain becoming the interface. And what we do is, it's kind of a similar thing, but we put the brain in the world, basically. And I suppose, like, in the future, we will be able also to see interactions between objects as well, and between devices, in very interesting ways.
For sure. Yeah, I think you made a good point there about, I think the BCIs are like a natural continuation of like iPhones and laptops, but but like HyperSurfaces is like a new paradigm, as you said. So I was also wondering if there are any like medical applications of like HyperSurface technology. Like, is there any useful things you can detect with like vibrations, like maybe like the way that a vibration moves through someone's bones or organs could tell you something about their health?
Yeah, as I was saying, our next step is really to expand this platform so as to incorporate also motion sensors. And there's so much you can say in terms of motion sensors, and the ability to spot interesting events from mundane ones, like how you're performing at the gym, to interesting, to whether, like, you're affected by Parkinson, and you're improving or not, like, and diagnosing, or really, like, more than diagnosing, like providing other information and other tools for doctors, basically, to have a more comprehensive view of what is going on. There's so much. Just think of, like, how many things we're doing now with passive sensing, and what would happen if this passive sensing becomes actually a provider for actual information about what actually happened, rather than just a noisy signal.
Yeah. How do you, so if so when HyperSurfaces are like integrated with everything, I was like, how long is their battery life, and like how do you foresee like charging them, right? Because it could be kind of clunky if, let's say, like I was thinking about the gym example you mentioned. Let's say someone has HyperSurfaces on the barbell. It could be kind of inconvenient if there's like a cable running from that to like the outlet. Do you foresee like any like wireless charging, or like maybe super long battery lives or something?
Yeah, I think, like, there are incredible things that are possible now. We are not a hardware company. We do the firmware, and then based on what you need, you're going to optimize. As an OEM, you're going to optimize what you think is more important. So for automotive companies, don't really care about battery because it's inside your car. But for smart cities, you might want to consider solar power, solar panels, or other things, and you want to optimize a lot. It's many things are possible now with IoT and the AI on the edge, and we see ourselves, like, that's kind of our limit. Is like we provide the firmware, and we have several prototypes, all with different sizes and battery lives. But at the end of the day, it depends on what you want to do as a designer.
For sure. Do you ever foresee like making some of the hardware in-house, or do you plan on outsourcing that?
No, because that would be too limiting, because there are companies interested in our technology that are just too different one from each other. And when you design your own hardware, it has to be designed specifically for an application, right?
Yeah,
So you might want to optimize battery for a smart city, but to do that, you might sacrifice a little bit of latency, but maybe you don't care if there's like 1 second of latency because it's going to be used just for analytics. I don't know, I'm improvising. Whereas if you make a musical instrument, you might very happily plug it, to power, but you want it to be as little latency as possible, right? So there's no such thing as one design. I think this technology can be useful to many different businesses and markets, and each one of them have different objectives and constraints.
for sure. So I think, so earlier you were saying like 2 years. Do you think that in 2 years, like there will be this technology in most places, or what, do you have like a prediction on the timeline for that?
Absolutely. I really hope so. I'm quite optimist. I mean, being a startup, there's always risk, but um, I can't see why. It's a really useful platform, really quick to use, and it does something that takes just years for other companies to figure out, which is basically how to create a very robust to noise AI models for vibrations and motion sensors soon, to enable like a completely new range of applications. So I see this being integrated in many firmwares that we see in the IoTs and chips around us.
For sure. Yeah, this is a very 0 to 1 idea, if you're familiar with the term. 0 to 1 is, yeah, it's like this for the audience. 0 to 1 is a book by Peter Thiel about entrepreneurship. Definitely recommend you all check it out. But going to the topic of entrepreneurship, I was wondering if that kind of, like, the decision to make a startup kind of just arose naturally from like the projects you were doing, or did you kind of have a separate desire for entrepreneurship?
No, it was very organic. I was doing my PhD, and I was doing my performances and my research. And to do that, I designed my own instrument. And then people started to write me, oh, I want one. Can I buy one? And I want one for my kid. I have this class. I'm teaching music for disabled kids. What do I do? It'll be very useful. And then I said, I really want to make this happen. I want to move like from academic literature to real innovation that actually changes people's life. And so I did a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter, and that was the beginning. And then very naturally that it became evident, because that in that one, yes, I needed to make the hardware for the music device, and so I needed to open a company and raise some funds and so on. So it all happened very naturally. It's not something that I decided actively, if
Yeah,
you want.
for sure. What are some things you like about being an entrepreneur?
That I like.
Yeah,
That adrenaline, I think, that sensation that you are actually, beyond that bubble of very academic way of thinking of doing advancements that stay there. I've like, what I love about being an entrepreneur is the fact that you're actually seeing your inventions being used by people, by real people, worldwide. In my case, And I think that's the best sensation, is just seeing people using what you created, and being able, based on that, being able to reinvent yourself as quickly as you want, based on the feedback you receive. That's what I really love. This being lean, being agile, being uh, data driven in a way. I really like this way of working and thinking.
As a researcher, you could also be customer facing, but I guess it's not as common to be so. So I think, so is that so yeah, all the points you mentioned earlier, that are those the main differences you see between like working in a startup and academia, or like what are like some things since we talked about what you liked about being an entrepreneur, what are some things you miss from academia?
Right. Well, being an entrepreneur is not just about the product you make. So the downside is that there's so much to do, so much to do, and you can feel lonely sometimes, because you have a lot to deal with, and you don't want to bother the rest of your team with financial issues, with fundraising, with all these things. So sometimes it's there's a lot to deal with, very little resources, very little time. So that's probably the main difference. When you work within a corporate, of course you have much less freedom, but you also have very large shoulders, in the sense that you have a lot more resources.
Yeah.
I mean, typically. So yeah, there are pros and cons, I guess. And of course, as we know, startups can also be acquired and become then part of a corporate, and then you get to witness both worlds.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on today. I know you're busy and have another meeting, so I'll let you get going.
All right, pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.